It was supposed to be a regular Wednesday morning. Leah Morgan had barely touched her coffee as she adjusted the collar of her thrift store blouse and braided her son's hair at the kitchen table. 8-year-old Jeremiah stared at his cereal, quiet, too quiet for a kid who usually turned breakfast into a concert. "Baby, what's wrong?" Leah asked, kneeling beside him. Jeremiah looked up. "Miss Patel made me sit in the hallway again yesterday. Just me." Leah's heart froze. That was the third time this month. No explanation, no phone call, just silent discipline for reasons they never clarified. He wasn't a troublemaker. He was just different. Leah closed her eyes briefly, drew in a breath, and stood up. She had called the school twice already and left voicemails. Got no reply. But today, she wasn't calling. Today she was showing up. The elementary school parking lot was already packed when she pulled in. Her beat-up Toyota rattled to a stop between two shiny SUVs. Parents in yoga pants shuffled kids toward the building, exchanging fake smiles and PTA gossip. Leah grabbed Jeremiah's hand and walked straight into the front office. "I need to speak to the principal," she said, voice steady. The secretary looked up, blinking. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I have a reason." A long pause, then a slow sigh. "Please have a seat. I'll see if he's available." Minutes passed, 10, 15. Jeremiah fidgeted beside her. Finally, Leah stood and approached the desk again. "Ma'am, I'm not leaving until I speak to someone. My son's being isolated repeatedly without cause." Behind the desk, the secretary picked up the phone. She whispered something. 2 minutes later, the school resource officer entered, and behind him a white police officer, stocky, short-tempered, and already scowling. His name tag read Officer Daniels. He walked in like he owned the place. "What's the problem here?" Daniels barked. Leah turned calmly. "I'm just trying to speak to the principal about my son." Daniels stepped forward, arms crossed. "And you were told to wait. If you can't follow basic instructions, we'll have to escort you off the premises." Leah blinked. "Excuse me? This is a public school. I'm a parent. I have every right to be here." Daniels scoffed. "You people always think rules don't apply to you." The words sliced through the air. Jeremiah squeezed her hand. Leah looked down at her son, then back at Daniels. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly. And that was all it took. Daniels reached for his cuffs. "Turn around. You're under arrest for trespassing and causing a disturbance." The room gasped. Even the secretary looked startled. "You're cuffing me? In front of my child?" Leah said, her voice cracking now. Daniels spun her around and locked her wrists behind her back. Jeremiah screamed, Ma! "Jeremiah, it's okay," she shouted over her shoulder. "Stay calm. Go wait with the lady at the front." But he didn't. He clung to her legs until a school aide pulled him away. Phone cameras clicked on. One parent had already started filming. Leah was marched through the front doors like a criminal. Her blouse was torn at the shoulder from the struggle, her face burning with humiliation, but her eyes never dropped. She kept her chin high. Outside, as Daniels pushed her into the backseat of his cruiser, she said just one sentence. "You don't know who I am, do you?" They booked her like she was nothing. Fingerprints. Mugshot. Holding cell. 6 hours passed before anyone acknowledged she even had a child waiting at school. No phone call was allowed. No lawyer was contacted. Daniels had made it clear in the report. Aggressive woman refused to comply. Escalated situation. School staff feared for safety. Lies, but Leah said nothing. Not yet. Because Leah Morgan wasn't just some angry mother. She was a former state prosecutor, Harvard Law class of 2011. And the only reason she wasn't wearing a suit in court that day was because she had taken time off to heal from losing her husband to cancer 3 years earlier. She had laid down the law to raise her son in peace. But the law had just knocked on her door again, so now it was personal. And next week, she'd walk into that same courtroom, not in handcuffs, but with a briefcase and fire in her voice. And Officer Daniels? He wouldn't be ready. The cell was freezing. Leah Morgan sat on a hard plastic bench, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her wrists still red from the cuffs. The fluorescent lights above her buzzed with a low hum, like a constant reminder she was no longer in control. No calls, no clock. Just time, stretching and swallowing her. The door hadn't opened in hours. At some point, a young officer, barely out of the academy, came by with a paper cup of water. He didn't speak. He just slid it through the slot and avoided her eyes. But Leah didn't need conversation. She was replaying every second of that morning like a case file in her mind. Officer Daniels's tone, the school secretary's face, Jeremiah's scream, the camera phones, the lies that would be buried in a police report by lunchtime. She knew the system, knew its tactics, knew it was silence. She had once used that same silence in a courtroom to dismantle corrupt defendants and walk justice down the aisle like a wedding vow. Now it was turned against her. By the time she was released on a low-level misdemeanor, the sun had dipped beneath the Atlanta skyline. A public defender offered her a stack of documents to sign. Leah glanced at it once. "I'll be representing myself," she said quietly. The clerk blinked. "Are you sure?" Leah didn't answer. She picked up her bag, confiscated, rifled through, and dumped back to her in a plastic tub, and walked out of the precinct without another word. Outside, the air smelled like rain and exhaust fumes. She didn't have a car. Daniels had arranged for it to be towed. She didn't have her phone. Its screen shattered in the scuffle. What she did have was purpose and fire. She made her way home on foot. The walk was long and dark, the city's neon lights reflecting in puddles beneath her heels. Each step cracked against the pavement like a gavel. When she finally climbed the stairs to her apartment, her neighbor's voice greeted her through the door. "Leah, baby, I've got Jeremiah. He's been asking for you non-stop." It was Miss Clara, a retired librarian who lived 2 doors down and had practically helped raise Jeremiah since the day Leah moved in. Leah opened the door slowly. Jeremiah ran into her arms, burying his face in her stomach. "They said you got arrested," he whispered. "Is it true?" She nodded. "Yes, baby, but I'm home now, and I'm okay." She knelt and kissed his forehead. He didn't ask if she'd done anything wrong. He knew better. Jeremiah was 8, but black kids didn't get the privilege of ignorance. The next morning, Leah sat on the worn couch, laptop open, notepad beside her. She wasn't going to retaliate with noise. She wasn't going to go online and scream into the void. She was building her case. Police report? She'd subpoena it. Footage? There were at least 5 parents filming. She'd find them. Witnesses? She'd start with the school secretary. But her real bet was on the young teacher, Miss Emery, the only one who looked Leah in the eye when Daniels grabbed her. She searched the school's staff directory, found her email, drafted a message. It was simple, professional, precise. "Dear Miss Emery, I believe you witnessed an incident on Wednesday involving me and my son at Elm Grove Elementary. I intend to take legal action against the arresting officer. If you're willing to speak privately, I deeply appreciate your insight." She hesitated before pressing send. Then she clicked. 2 hours later, her inbox pinged from aemery@edschools.org. Subject: I saw everything. "Dear Miss Morgan, I've been thinking about you and your son ever since that day. What happened was wrong. I know it. The other staff know it. I'm scared, but I want to help. Can we meet?" Leah stared at the screen for a long time. Help. That was a word she hadn't heard in a while, without strings attached. That night, they met at a coffee shop tucked inside a bookstore downtown. Miss Emery was even younger than Leah expected, maybe 26, with nervous hands and tired eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't do anything that day," she said as soon as Leah sat down. "You didn't have to," Leah replied. "But now, you can." Miss Emery leaned in. "Officer Daniels has a history. I've seen him grab kids for no reason. Parents complain, but the school covers for him. He's friends with the assistant superintendent." Leah nodded slowly, sipping her tea. "I'm going to expose him," she said, "but I won't do it through social media. I'm going to do it legally, officially, and permanently. You understand?" "Yes," Emery whispered. "I want to be a part of that." Back at home, Leah tucked Jeremiah into bed. He had barely spoken all evening. As she pulled the blanket over him, he looked up. "Are you going to go back to work now, Mama?" Leah paused. 3 years ago, she had walked away from the courtroom after her husband's funeral, said she was done fighting. Said it wasn't worth it anymore. But something in her had shifted again. Not just fire, but focus. Maybe the fight wasn't over. Maybe it was just starting. She bent down and kissed Jeremiah's cheek. "I think I am," she whispered. "But this time, I'm not fighting for strangers. I'm fighting for you." He nodded, eyes closing slowly. Outside, the city moved on. But inside, a storm was quietly building. And Officer Daniels had no idea. The woman he arrested was the same woman who once stood across from governors and judges, and never lost a single motion in her life. And she was coming back for him. Courtrooms smelled of old wood, waxed floors, and slow justice. It was Monday morning, and the Fulton County Courthouse buzzed with the dull rhythm of arraignments, motions, and overworked public defenders. Most cases were just paperwork and procedure. Names called, charges read, bail set. But not this one. State of Georgia versus Leah Morgan. At 9:52 a.m., the bailiff opened the door. Leah stepped in, calm, composed, and deliberate. Her tailored black suit was sharp but understated, her hair pulled into a simple bun, makeup light but precise. She walked like someone who didn't belong there. Not on the defense side, anyway. People noticed. A few attorneys glanced up from their folders. One prosecutor nudged his colleague and whispered, "Is that Leah Morgan?" Even the judge paused for a beat before continuing. Officer Daniels sat at the prosecution's table, legs spread wide, his uniform pristine, his expression smug. He didn't recognize her. Not yet. When her name was called, Leah stood tall. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Miss Morgan, do you have legal representation today?" Leah stepped forward slowly. "I do, Your Honor." The judge looked around. "Counsel, please identify yourself." She placed her briefcase on the desk, opened it, and removed a leather wallet. With a single motion, she held up her Bar of Georgia attorney ID. There was a murmur across the room. "My name is Leah Morgan," she said clearly. "Bar number 46217B, former Assistant District Attorney of Fulton County. Today, I will be representing myself." Officer Daniels' jaw visibly clenched. The judge leaned forward slightly, eyebrows rising. "Miss Morgan, welcome back." She offered a polite nod. "Thank you, Your Honor. I also have a motion to submit." The prosecutor, a mid-level assistant DA in his 30s, shifted awkwardly in his seat. He glanced at Daniels, then at Leah, clearly unsure of what universe he had just stepped into. Leah stepped to the bench and handed the clerk her motion. A civil rights violation suit filed against Officer Daniels for unlawful arrest, excessive force, and racial discrimination, with herself as plaintiff. "I'd like the court to take judicial notice of this filing," Leah said smoothly. "Additionally, I am requesting all body camera footage, school surveillance tapes, dispatch audio, and a list of any previous complaints filed against Officer Daniels with the department in the last 5 years." The courtroom was silent. Daniels finally spoke, his voice rising. "This is ridiculous. She was trespassing. The school called it in." Leah turned her head slowly and looked him in the eyes for the first time. "Officer Daniels," she said, voice calm but cold. "Do you remember saying, 'You people always think the rules don't apply to you'?" Daniels froze. The judge's face hardened. "You said that in front of my son, while I was unarmed, while I was speaking to a school staff member, while I was standing in a public school hallway." She turned to the judge. "I have 3 independent videos showing no resistance. I have an eyewitness, Miss Emery, a teacher at the school, will testify. I also have Daniels' incident report, which contradicts both the footage and the school's internal security logs." The judge looked at the assistant DA. "Is this accurate?" The prosecutor fumbled with his folder. Your Honor, we haven't yet reviewed all of the submitted footage, but—" "You might want to," the judge said dryly. Daniels shifted in his seat, visibly sweating now. Leah took one slow breath, then continued. "Your Honor, I respectfully request that this case be dismissed immediately. The arrest was unlawful, retaliatory, and based on racial profiling. Further, I am filing a federal Section 1983 civil suit against Officer Daniels and the City of Atlanta Police Department." Gasps swept through the small audience. Daniels turned red. "This is a circus. She's trying to turn this into some kind of media stunt." Leah smiled. "Just slightly." "If I wanted a media stunt, Officer Daniels," she said softly, "I'd have gone viral last week. I didn't post a thing. I'm not here for noise. I'm here for accountability." The judge turned to Daniels. "Officer, until the court has reviewed the footage and accompanying statements, I advise you to remain silent." Daniels folded his arms tightly, seething. Leah walked back to her seat. The prosecutor stood and muttered, "We request a 1-week continuance to review all evidence and reassess our position." "Granted," the judge said. "Miss Morgan, we'll reconvene this time next week?" Leah nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." As the judge moved on to the next case, whispers erupted behind her. A court clerk leaned to a bailiff. "That's Leah Morgan, the one who prosecuted the Madison Grove triple homicide." She's no joke. Daniels stormed out of the courtroom, pushing the heavy doors like they'd offended him. In the hallway, his voice could be heard echoing. She ambushed me. That's not fair. She's a damn lawyer. How was I supposed to know that? Inside the courtroom, Leah gathered her files. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She was preparing. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about Jeremiah. About the look on his face when he watched his mother get handcuffed. About all the mothers who didn't have law degrees. All the women who had to stay quiet because they couldn't fight back. Leah wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. As she stepped outside into the sharp Georgia sunlight, a reporter with a camera rushed up. "Miss Morgan, do you have any comment about the case?" She paused for just a second, then said, "Let the evidence speak. I'm just getting started." And with that, she walked away, heels clicking, head high, and justice gathering behind her like a storm. 1 week later, the courtroom was packed. Law students sat shoulder to shoulder in the gallery. A local journalist from Atlanta Public Justice Watch typed furiously on her laptop. Even a city councilman took a seat in the back row, arms crossed, watching intently. They weren't here for routine hearings. They were here to witness a war. Leah Morgan sat at the defense table, not just calm, but calculated. Her black suit was immaculate, her eyes sharp behind frameless glasses. To her right was a thick binder labeled People vs. Daniels Exhibits AF. Across from her, Officer Daniels sat with his attorney, a city-appointed bulldog named Mark Renshaw. Tall, white, mid-50s, with the smugness of someone who'd been paid to win at any cost. But even Renshaw looked tense today. Because Leah had the one weapon they couldn't prepare for. The judge called the room to order. "We'll begin with pretrial evidentiary review," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Miss Morgan, you may proceed." Leah stood slowly, her voice clear and cool. "Your Honor, I will begin by presenting footage from 3 separate angles recorded on the day of my arrest. One from a parent, one from school surveillance, and one from Officer Daniels' own body cam." She approached the screen set up beside the bench. With a remote click, the first video began. It showed the hallway. A calm exchange. Leah is asking the secretary for help. Jeremiah was beside her, holding her hand. Daniels storms in at minute 2. "You people always think." The audio was unmistakable. The gallery murmured. "Pause," Leah said. "Your Honor, I move to have that phrase admitted as evidence of racially charged misconduct." "Admitted," the judge said firmly. She played the second clip, Daniels forcefully grabbing her arm, no resistance. Jeremiah screaming. And the third, the body cam. Daniels' own voice lying in the dispatch log. "Suspect is belligerent, threatening staff." But there was no threat, no aggression. Just a mother. Leah turned off the screen and faced the courtroom. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an overreaction. It was profiling. It was an escalation, and it was a deliberate abuse of power. Renshaw stood, voice like gravel. "Your Honor, we don't deny the footage is troubling, but Officer Daniels acted on a legitimate school call. He entered a tense situation. He used discretion." Leah smiled tightly. "Discretion," she echoed. "Is that what we're calling bias now?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Renshaw," Leah continued, "you claim your client acted professionally. Let's test that." She turned to the bailiff. "Please call Amelia Emery to the stand." Miss Emery, the young teacher, approached nervously but stood her ground. "Miss Emery," Leah asked gently, "were you present the day of the incident?" "Yes." "Did you witness any violence or aggression from me before Officer Daniels arrived?" "No, you were calm. You just asked to speak to the principal." "And after he arrived?" Miss Emery swallowed. "He didn't ask questions. He just barked orders, then cuffed you." "Did you feel threatened by my behavior?" "Not at all. Thank you, Miss Emery. No further questions." Renshaw barely cross-examined her. He knew better. Leah's next move was strategic. She pulled out a personnel report. "Your Honor, I'd now like to submit a copy of Officer Daniels' internal record. While sealed, I obtained court-approved access for relevant portions." She passed it to the judge. 3 citizen complaints for excessive force, 2 internal warnings for conduct unbecoming, 1 sensitivity training, completed only after an incident involving a black teen 3 years ago. Renshaw objected. "Irrelevant past conduct." "Sustained," the judge said, then paused. "But noted." Daniels shifted uncomfortably. Leah didn't miss a beat. Then came the twist. She walked to the center of the room, then turned to Daniels. "Officer Daniels," she said, You've said under oath that you had no idea who I was the day of my arrest. Is that correct? Daniels grunted. Yeah, never seen you before. Leah tilted her head. That's interesting, because I recognized you. Daniels's brow furrowed. She pulled out a photo, blown up, printed on board. It showed Leah at a podium 5 years earlier, teaching at the Georgia Law Enforcement Training Academy. And seated in the second row, a younger, clean-shaven Officer Daniels. You were in my class, she said quietly. When I taught lawful arrest procedures and civil rights violations, you sat in the second row. You submitted a final paper on probable cause. Gasps broke out in the courtroom. Even the judge stared. Daniels went pale. Leah leaned forward. Tell me, officer, was my arrest lawful? Were my rights respected? Or did you forget everything you were taught the moment my skin tone didn't fit your expectations? Daniels' attorney jumped up. Your Honor, I object to this grandstanding. The judge slammed his gavel. Sit down, counselor. The rest of the hearing blurred into legal cleanup. The footage was officially admitted. Daniels was ordered to turn over additional documents. A motion to suppress Leah's civil countersuit was denied. And before adjourning, the judge made one final remark. In 30 years on this bench, I've seen every excuse for bad policing, but rarely have I seen a more methodical, composed, and devastating response than what I saw today. He looked directly at Leah. Miss Morgan, this court recognizes your standing, not just as a defendant, but as a force of law. We'll see both cases proceed side by side. The court was dismissed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps. Flashes popped, microphones jutted out. Miss Morgan, do you plan to press federal charges? Did you really teach Daniels law enforcement? Why did you stay silent all this time? Leah held up her hand. I didn't stay silent. I was waiting for the right courtroom. And then just as she turned to leave, someone called out, Do you think you'll win? She paused, looked over her shoulder, and answered, I already have. The final day of trial arrived under an overcast sky. It had been 6 weeks since Leah Morgan first walked into that courtroom in handcuffs. Now she stood at the same podium, no longer as a defendant, but as a plaintiff fighting on behalf of every parent silenced by power, every black woman dismissed by authority, every truth buried beneath paperwork. The jury was seated, 12 strangers, all watching her. Across the room, Officer Daniels looked like a shell of the man who had swaggered into that school hallway. He no longer wore his uniform. His attorney had advised a low profile. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by clenched hands and darting eyes. He hadn't spoken publicly since his disastrous testimony, where he contradicted his own body cam footage and tried weakly to claim that "you people" wasn't racial. The courtroom hadn't bought it. Neither did the jury. Leah stood for closing arguments. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't wave her hands. She didn't need theatrics. She just told the truth. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I am not here today to prove that Officer Daniels doesn't know the law. I am here to prove that he believed I didn't. I was arrested not because I posed a threat, but because I refused to shrink. Because I asked questions. Because I didn't back down. I was handcuffed in front of my son for doing what any loving parent would do. But instead of accountability, I was met with a badge and a bias. Today is not just about me, it's about precedent. It's about what we as a society are willing to tolerate from those who swear to protect us. The system only works when truth speaks louder than power. I ask you to be that truth. She returned to her seat. The room was silent. Even the judge looked shaken. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman, Aya, a black woman in her 40s, wearing a blue blouse and steady eyes, stood and cleared her throat. In the matter of Morgan versus Daniels, we the jury find in favor of the plaintiff, Leah Morgan, on all counts. A breath rippled through the gallery. We award damages in the amount of $1 symbolic and require mandatory termination of Officer Daniels from the Atlanta Police Department, along with referral to the Department of Justice for civil rights investigation. The courtroom erupted, not with applause, with silence. A heavy, powerful silence, like the moment after a verdict in history. Daniels' attorney protested. This is political. This is a witch hunt. But the judge had already banged the gavel. This court recognizes not just the legal victory, but the ethical one, he said. Miss Morgan's restraint, clarity, and pursuit of justice represent what the law was designed to uphold. Officer Daniels's conduct, on the other hand, is everything it must root out. Daniels was escorted out of the courtroom. He didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Dozens of people. Some were strangers who had followed the case online. Others were mothers from the neighborhood, activists, students, and veterans of court battles themselves. And in the center of it all stood Jeremiah, holding a handmade sign in crayon. "My mom fought the law and won." Leah walked down the steps, surrounded by cameras, but her eyes locked on her son. She knelt. He threw his arms around her neck. "You did it, Mama." She smiled through tears. "No, baby, we did." The story spread fast. Major outlets picked it up. Single mom defeats racist cop in landmark civil rights case. From handcuffs to hero, former prosecutor turns system on its head. Talk shows invited her. Law schools quoted her argument. A former appellate judge called her final statement the most important closing of the decade. But Leah didn't chase the spotlight. She used it. She launched a nonprofit, Frontline Mothers, providing legal aid and advocacy for women of color wrongfully arrested, especially those raising children alone. Within a month, it had over $250,000 in donations. Meanwhile, the fallout in the Atlanta Police Department was swift. 3 other officers were suspended after whistleblower footage surfaced of their mishandling of school-related arrests. The assistant superintendent, who had previously defended Daniels, resigned under pressure. And in an extraordinary city council session, a motion was passed requiring mandatory anti-bias training for every school resource officer in the state. The city's message was clear. The days of "you people" were over. But Leah's work wasn't done. One evening, weeks later, she visited a high school gymnasium. The bleachers were filled with students, young, bright-eyed, skeptical. She stood at the podium in front of a banner that read, "Future Law, Empowering Tomorrow's Voices." She shared her story. And when a student raised his hand and asked, "Weren't you scared?" she answered without hesitation, "Of course, but courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that your child's dignity is worth more than your silence." The crowd stood, applauded, some even cried. Later that night, back at home, Jeremiah curled up beside her on the couch. "Can you promise me something?" he asked. "Anything," she replied. "If I ever get in trouble at school again, you won't go to jail, right?" She laughed, real laughter this time. "No, baby, I'll walk in that building and they'll hold the door open for me." He smiled. "Good, 'cause I told Miss Patel you were famous now." Leah pulled him close, kissed his forehead. "Not famous," she whispered, "just free." 3 months after the verdict, the courtroom was no longer Leah Morgan's battleground. Her battlefield had shifted to classrooms, community centers, legal workshops, Zoom webinars, church basements, and even to a Senate panel hearing. Wherever injustice lingered in silence, she showed up, soft-spoken but sharp, patient but unshakable. Her voice wasn't just heard, it was followed. Frontline Mothers, her nonprofit, exploded in growth. By the end of the first quarter, they had secured pro bono partnerships with 5 major law firms, a grant from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and were featured in a New York Times article titled, "From Prosecutor to Protector, the Woman Turning Pain into Policy." Their mission was clear. No woman should have to know the law just to keep her child safe. They launched a 24/7 hotline, built an online resource hub, published a guidebook for single moms, Know Your Rights at the School Gate. And the case of Morgan v. Daniels? It became required reading in law schools across the country. But Leah's biggest victory didn't happen in a courthouse. It happened one rainy afternoon at East Lake Elementary, the very same school where she'd been arrested months earlier. She returned, not to confront, but to speak. Principal Davis, who had avoided her for weeks after the incident, now stood nervously at her side in the auditorium. Students filed in. Teachers whispered. Some looked ashamed, others looked inspired. Leah stepped onto the stage. Jeremiah was in the front row, sitting next to Miss Emery, the young teacher who had testified with trembling hands and an iron will. Leah's voice filled the auditorium. "Some of you saw something that day. Some of you said nothing. Some of you recorded. Some of you looked away. But I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to ask about your future. When you see injustice again, and you will, what will you do? Because silence," she said, glancing at the staff, "is a choice too." A beat. And then? Students started clapping, not out of obligation, out of awakening. That night, Leah and Jeremiah walked home hand in hand. "I liked it when you said, 'Silence is a choice,'" he said. Leah smiled. "You remember that, okay?" He nodded. "Can I say that to my teacher if she's unfair?" "You can say it to anyone, baby, even me." He looked up. "Even you?" She laughed. "Especially me." A month later, she received an unexpected letter. It was handwritten, unpolished, and filled with crossed-out words. But it was signed at the bottom, from a former officer trying to unlearn and do better. M.D. Daniels. Inside the envelope was a second note. "My son asked me why I hurt a mom. I didn't have an answer. But I'm trying to find one." Leah sat for a long time, the letter trembling in her hand. She didn't write back. Not because she didn't forgive him, but because some answers need time and silence to grow roots. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., her work had reached the ears of Senator Raina Brooks, a former civil rights attorney turned policymaker. Brooks invited Leah to testify before the Senate Committee on Public Education and Law Enforcement. In the chamber, beneath the great American seal, Leah stood again, not as a victim, not even as a lawyer, but as a mother. Our schools should not be patrolled like prisons. Our children should not grow up afraid of people in uniform, and our parents should not need a law degree to walk into a principal's office. That clip went viral. The next day, 5 senators co-sponsored a bill called the Morgan Act, a federal mandate requiring racial bias training, community oversight boards for school policing, and federal penalties for abuse of authority involving minors. It passed the subcommittee. History, once again, was moving, because one woman refused to sit down. But perhaps the most personal chapter unfolded far away from cameras, bills, and stages. It happened one evening when Leah walked into her bedroom and found Jeremiah sitting on the floor, sorting through a shoebox. "What's all that?" she asked. "My legacy," he said with a grin. She knelt beside him, confused. Inside the box were scraps of paper, sketches, and quotes he had copied into a notebook. At the top of one page, he had written in big block letters, "I fight with my voice." Below it, a drawing of his mom at a podium, holding a scale of justice in one hand and his hand in the other. Leah's breath caught in her chest. She pulled him close. "Jeremiah, you already know your legacy?" He shrugged. "You showed me." Years later, when Jeremiah Morgan gave the commencement speech at his law school graduation, he started with one story. "My mother was arrested in front of me when I was 8. The cop didn't know she was a lawyer. The school didn't care that I cried. But she never raised her voice. She raised her purpose, and that purpose changed everything." The audience stood. Some had tears in their eyes, and seated in the front row, now grayer but just as proud, Leah clapped and clapped and clapped, because legacies aren't built in marble halls. They're built in school hallways, in courtrooms, in whispered conversations, in the quiet strength of a woman who says, "Not this time." And when Leah Morgan first said that, she wasn't thinking of history. She was thinking of her son. But history heard her anyway.